I'm excited to welcome our first guest. He is the co-author of The Privatization of Everything, How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back, and the executive director of In the Public Interest, Donald Cohen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm in Tennessee, so it's good to visiting Tennessee, and you're visiting Puerto Rico. So that's
working during our, I'm not on vacation, but working while we're traveling.
Yep.
So Donald, this is privatization is not something new, but it does seem like it's gotten a little bit out of control. I guess we just my first question is, when did privatization, the model of privatization, begin?
That's a interesting. There's a multi-sided answer. So many people thought it was President Reagan, right? So that President Reagan came in to attacking government and all that, but it actually wasn't. So there was a prehistory. There were conservative intellectuals, libertarians, and market fundamentalists, neoliberals, who really were worried, trying to figure out how to push back on the New Deal. As Harvey K would say, on sort of the four freedoms type of, as you're going to have later, right? And so, people like Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, and other that, so they were sort of identifying, we need to figure out how to push back on the idea that government is an instrument of good that can serve the people, fundamentally. Reagan came, and they were doing lots of work and work in the cities as well. There were people who were saying in the 70s, well, governments don't need to pick up the trash nor be the police. We can outsource all those things. There's no reason the market couldn't take care of that. Reagan comes in, and he's sort of the propagandist in chief for an anti-government, pro-market set of values. But what most people don't realize is he actually failed to privatize much. And Democrats were in control of the House and the Senate, as well as there was still kind of the New Deal ethic was still kind of had dominated the culture. People wanted the stuff, and so by the end of the Reagan, I'm trying to give a long answer, but by the end of the Reagan administration, strategists from the Heritage Foundation, from Cato, realized that privatization could be a way to break the pro-budget and pro-government consensus by directing demands for services, because people still wanted the stuff, directing those demands to the private sector. So it became kind of a key strategy to downsize government, to weaken public support for government. President Clinton gets elected, and the era of big government is over, and he institutionalized privatization that Reagan couldn't do.
And if you were to describe privatization in a sentence, I think a lot of people hear it or familiar with it more or less, but is there sort of a purist definition of it?
Well, I have a very particular definition, and it does need some explanation. So I say it's private control over public goods. So what I mean by, first off, what do we mean by public goods? The things that we all need to survive and thrive, and that we need everybody to have so that we can all survive and thrive. Whether we need a good education system for our kids, but even if you don't have kids, we need every child to be educated. That's good for the country and for all of us. So private control happens, and then private control happens in a variety of ways. And I'll give some examples to make it clearer, but it's, we sign long-term contracts with private companies that hand over, that give them legal contractual authority over things that we ought to be able to have. Or things like childcare. I consider childcare in the US a fully privatized public good. We all need it. I mean, if you have kids, you need it. There's no question about it. But it's fundamentally a commodity, and parents are left on their own to figure it out in the market when it really should be available to everybody, high quality childcare. So it's a broad definition. If you'd like, I can I'll let you continue. But it's good to I could give a few examples to make all that clear. It sounds abstract sometimes.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. What are some examples?
Well, so the example one of the things I like to use a lot is from Chicago during the Great Recession, 2008. Cities bleeding red ink, cities, states, in horrible fiscal shape. Governments were because of the crash of the economy. So a consortium of a private consortium of three companies, Morgan Stanley, Wall Street investment firm, an investment firm, what's called a sovereign wealth fund from a country in the Middle East, a national fund, and a national parking company, offered the city $1.1 billion upfront in cash in exchange for control of the city's 36,000 parking meters for 75 years, till 2083. Okay. Now, the proposal was announced on a Friday. They voted on a Tuesday. So not a lot of scrutiny. Private companies that want to privatize things, one of the things they say is, desperate government is our best customer. So that was the case there. So, but here's what became true after the fact and when the analysis happened. Now, let me just say, unbelievably stupid way to borrow on your future parking meter revenues. I mean, we all borrow on future income. That's how we buy houses or what have you. But 75 years, we may not even be driving. So, but here's what's even much more important. If the city, for the life of the contracts, the remaining 60 some odd years, wants to eliminate parking spots temporarily for a street fair, or more importantly, permanently for bike lanes, dedicated bus lanes, pedestrian malls to deal with climate, traffic, housing, they have to buy the spots back, which means they often don't do it. A professor that I know, we wrote a piece together. She had interviewed transit planners after the deal was done in Chicago, and they couldn't implement a plan to expand bus rapid transit. So the reason I tell that story is because those contracts, embed their interests in our stuff, and they're straitjackets on democracy, because the elected leaders can they're handcuffed to be able to do their job.
So just to get this right, so folks, the contract is to basically for a company to control the flow of money into these parking meters, but the land is still the city's. Yet because of this contract, they cannot do what they want with the land because they have this other contract that sort of voids any because it's contingent on having a place to park.
Yeah, I mean, there's if they take a spot away, I mean, the private company doesn't own the street, the spot, right. They own the meter. But if you take a spot away, meaning you have to take a meter away so they can't make money from that spot, you got to pay them for it.
That's insane. Unbelievable. I mean, that's basically holding the city hostage to whatever they want, especially these extremely long contracts.
Right. And it's a terrible deal. Everybody knows it's a terrible deal, but there are features of it that are very common.
Now, are there any instances, and we can get into how cities have fought back against privatization, but are there any instances in which there are contracts that have been in place, these crazy predatory contracts that come in when, a city's in bankruptcy, or it's after the recession, et cetera, and here now you have to take a 150-year contract with this banking, whatever, the same exact story.
Yeah.
But are there any examples of where those contracts were broken?
Well, in Chicago, because a deal's a deal, so it depends on the fine print of the contract. When Rahm Emanuel became the mayor, because everyone hates it, the only thing he was able to do was to renegotiate it, because they wanted to have free parking on Sunday mornings for church, but in exchange, they had to expand parking during the week till 10 p.m. So a deal's a deal. Now, there are cases, there's a water deal in Montana. There was a water deal in Montana. It often, when they want to break contracts or eliminate contracts, it often results in lawsuits.
I mean, it could be also a company that falls apart. I mean, a lot of these companies over leverage themselves. So in that case, what if there's a company that is bought by another company, or, right. How do you deal with that kind of contract at that point?
Well, there was a road deal in this is again infrastructure road deal in Indiana when this was under Mitch Daniels before Pence, and then Pence was involved later on as governor. They made projections. They were going to make this much money. It wasn't working out. They went bankrupt. The control of the entity that controlled the road went bankrupt, the state had the opportunity to basically take control of it and just then now run it as a state effort. But this was when Pence was governor and he was sort of ideologically inclined towards privatization. So he decided to sell it again to a different company. So it can happen. I mean, there are water systems around the country that have been re-municipalized or re-brought back in. Not necessarily because of bankruptcies, but different reasons. Some because they could do it cheaper, some because people realize they want control of their water. It's not, the private company shouldn't be making money off of it, and have decision-making authority over things like conservation or climate issues, resilience issues, things like that.
So how do these companies tend to perform? Is there sort of a common theme that when an agency, a utility is privatized, they do better, worse? Are there some that do better in certain industries or worse than certain industries? How does this measure?
It's all over the map, right? It's hard to generalize, but so I will make some general points. Because there are companies that do good work. The privatized roads are still there. I've been on a few of them. But here's the thing to understand, right? There's a few key things. One is money is number one. Things cost money. Second is that if it's a private company, there's money being taken away from the service for high, executive compensation packages were often high, for returns to investors, often for debt service, because companies often buy other companies and take debt. So that money is leaving the service. So then the question is, where do they get that money? Because they all say they're going to do it cheaper. That's the other key argument. And it's a pretty finite list of things they can get it cheaper from. If it's a prison, fewer workers, which they've done. So, there's a privatized juvenile facility, I think in Mississippi, went from 1 to 12 corrections officers to inmates to 1 to 60. Wow. It became a terrible scene, right? Or you could pay them less, which they do, and higher turnover. I mean, so there's sort of negative impacts of that, all the above. You could use, lower quality equipment, like, or paint on the wall, or food services, or what have you. It's pretty finite what you can spend less money on. So we always look at the incentive structures, right? The incentives, like, where's the money going? Are they incentivized to cut corners beyond what should be, not just trim things to make it more efficient, but to cut corners? And you see that all over the place. But the key feature is it depends on the contracting agency.
Interesting. Because
contracting is pretty hard. And government agencies often get taken because it's complicated and it's long-term and you got to think ahead. And, if you do really good contracting, you can protect yourself on some of those things.
Interesting. Okay. So there have been municipalities who fought off and, the people have fought off privatization, post-privatization, pre-privatization. Teachers famously are constantly in this fight over privatization. I'm here on the island of Puerto Rico, and this is a huge fight here over everything from the energy sector to teachers, and this is sort of the incubator, I would say, for a lot of these strategies without going down a rabbit hole. But where have they won, and how has that happened? What's the playbook?
Well, again, when you read a book called The Privatization of Everything, it's hard to get it down to a few things. But I'll start with a big example. I'm in Tennessee right now. I just got here last night. Republican state, a voucher law was beat. A proposal to create school vouchers was beat last week in the legislature here because rural Republican legislators saw that it would siphon money from their schools that they like, because that's actually what does happen. So to the larger point there is that they win when they can show the impacts, right? Schools, the growth of charter schools take away money from public schools, more than the money that comes with the kid because it costs more. Vouchers take away money, and that affects everybody, right? So that's the other way we've helped, people have won, and we've helped one is by sort of interrogating the proposals. Wait a second, you say you're going to save money. How? Like, what are you going to spend less on? Is it going to cut wages, or you're going to have less people, or or what could happen? Just take Chicago. What could happen? Will we lose the ability in 10 years to make decisions to respond to the climate crisis? When you ask those questions, and you go down through those things to really interrogate the proposal, you can beat them, and we do. It happens a lot.
Does it seem like the public's opinion on privatization of utilities is shifting?
Hard to know. Infrastructure, utility, water, roads, bridges, so physical infrastructure, they now use the term public-private partnerships. And there's a specific meaning of that. It has particular terms of how things are financed and all that. But in part, it's because privatization has a little bit of a bad rap, right? If you remember George W. Bush was going to use his political capital, as it were, to privatize Social Security, and that didn't go well because people get the stock market isn't always there for you. So in public-private partnerships, like motherhood and apple pie, and it actually just happened last night or yesterday. Someone asked, a reporter asked, they will often say for a public-private partnership, well, it's a 75-year deal, but it's not privatization because we'll own it. We'll get it back in 75 years. That's wrong. So the other example I could give, boy, whoever's doing that's really good.
David, he's on it. I say the same thing. I can't tell you how many times I've the word isn't even fully out of my mouth and it's up on screen. I'm like, how does he know?
He is good. So this is a very specific example, but broadband. Right now, I think everybody gets now that access to the internet is as important as the road system. It's basic infrastructure everybody needs, and we need everybody to have. So a bunch of big the big telecoms go to state legislatures to try to prevent and prohibit local governments from creating municipal public broadband. Okay, and they do that down here in the South, but they did it in Colorado, but allowed for citizens of voters in cities, if they did want municipal broadband, they could do a public vote. Every place that did it won overwhelmingly. Now, why? I can speculate. One is they need it. It's probably cheaper. And none of us like our internet companies. We get that private isn't always better.
And the prices can go up too. I mean, I think right now what I'm curious about is, given this history of privatization and the economic moment we're in, just there are many municipalities that have been underfunded for. Let's take New York City, for instance. Our subway system has been starved for years. We refuse to tax certain individuals or companies or real estate developers who could fund the subway system, or the CUNY, the school, university of the city. I mean, these are all different aspects of the city that should be generating more wealth than any other city probably in the United States. Yet the subway is completely in disarray. It hasn't been updated. It has lots of issues. There's a board that oversees it that has a lot of developer ties. Is this sort of the model? Like, they starve it and then the private companies come in and they say, oh, we're going to fix it. But
yes.
I guess the question is, do they fix them usually? And are the rates cheaper? Here in Puerto Rico, that's not happening. I know that with the energy sector.
So you nailed it. So first off, but one more piece of the puzzle. There's been a 40-year narrative attack on drumbeat against government, right? Both the idea of government and the institution of government, right? We all hate the DMV, even though that's actually not true anymore in my town. It's like, okay. So, but there's this constant negative attack on government. I don't know who that guy is. So that's number one. Number two is there's also been tax cutting. We've all been in an environment of tax cutting. Okay, so put those as part of the background. So you have public services that then don't have the resources, and so therefore start to decline. You have an attack on them. And then the privatizers will come in, or the market types will come in and say, we've got the answer. We're the reformers. Cheaper, better, faster. The key there is to say, okay, first, and I've done that. I've talked to lots of reporters. It sounds so obvious. I say, first thing you got to do is things cost money, period. Second thing you got to understand is there's only one place to get it, us, period. Right? So when they also, when they want to take over something, they'll say cheaper, better, faster, and no new taxes. It's a lie.
Sure. I'm sure that's true.
Well, here's why it doesn't matter, because there's only one place to get the money from us: taxes, tolls, and fees. So yeah, there may be no new taxes, but the fees go way up, right? The parking meters in Chicago went way up. Water systems have been privatized. I mean, listen, the rates may have been too low to maintain the system. They get the system, and then they raise the rates because it costs money. And not only does it cost money, but now you have extra money for returns to investors. You got to pay for stuff.
Interesting. Extra money for returns to investors. Okay. I think the last question I have, and this comes from David, who's been very relevant to this conversation. Just for those of you who are listening on podcast, we're referencing a lot of the screen things that pop up on screen, if you're wondering. So David says, how do they continue to successfully argue for more privatization despite the negative results? And I'll add, despite the negative reputation at this point. Even PPP, I think, is starting to lose its effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. It's frustration with government agencies that don't do a good job. I mean, government's complicated. They don't always do a good job. It's our job to reform them and make them better and better and better. It's taking advantage of that. Number two is this sort of, propaganda machine, pro-market propaganda machine. It is a belief that business is more efficient than public institutions. It's a belief that's deeply embedded in American culture. Now, like I was referring earlier, when people talk about efficiency to me, I say, that's spending less on something. Tell me exactly what you're going to spend less on. That's not, because, you got to kind of break through. They believe that markets are, competition is what makes things better. And that's certainly true in certain areas, but competition in charter schools causes schools to push out kids that are costly or harder to educate. Right. So there's a downside to these things as well. So we're in this environment of pro-market ideas, number one. Number two is, it's become a conservative effort to privatize, in part because they want to downsize government, in second part because they want to downsize and really eliminate public sector unions, so that it gives them an opportunity to get political control. And then the private companies that get the deals, remember the profits that the private prison industry has gotten from the public, every dollar was a tax dollar, has been used in the past to lobby for laws that put more people in prison so that they can sell more heads and beds. Right? So there's there's both political and ideological reasons and then I guess the last is desperation. If you're a mayor and you're running a city and somebody comes and shows you pretty pictures and it's one less problem, you don't think ahead. You drink the Kool-Aid and you go, and it's not, a lot of bad decisions are made in that situation.
And of course, if they're donating to your campaign, it makes it much easier.
There's always a little bit there's a club there.
I think this is what some might call a racket. A little bit of a racket.
Well, here's what it is. Pre-COVID, so governments in America were spending $7 trillion a year. It's now more, right? Mm-hmm. $7 trillion. So if you're running a private prison company, or you're running a water company, or you're running whatever, you're trying. All businesses do is sell stuff. Right. So they want to sell to us, and they have a whole marketing and promotion and lobbying operation, surrounding it. Yep.
Well, everybody go check out Donald Cohen's new book on privatization titled The Privatization of Everything: How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. That's the key part here. How we can fight back. I think the momentum's on our side. The the energy is shifting, but we need to know how to do it. So everyone, go check out Donald Cohen's book. Donald, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy Tennessee.
Thank you. And people can get in touch. We have lots of tools and tricks on how to fight. If you're in a particular area, just go to our website. You can find us really easy.
Website's going to be in all the information sections. You can go check out the organization that Donald's the executive director of, titled In the Public Interest, and we'll put your Twitter link up there as well. So thank you very much for joining us, Donald. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed this.
If you haven't already, make sure to join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Our patrons are what keep this show alive and well. It's how we can do it on the road when I'm filming other stuff. It is patrons who keep us going.